All right, so good morning and welcome to the Advisory Committee for the Marijuana Violation Reclassification Package. Today is Wednesday, October 20th, and it's around 9 o'clock a.m. My name is Amanda Borup. I'm a policy analyst for the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Since we're on this video, I asked video and audio. Anybody who's on that's not speaking, please mute your phones or your computers. I'm going to be tech support today, so I'll go ahead and mute all occasionally if needed, just to keep the noise down. Only invited committee members are part of today's discussion. Members were selected due to their level of interest or position in the community. If you're not an invited member or a proxy, please use the call-in number that was on the notice for the advisory committee meeting. With that in mind, I ask that each of you serve as goodwill ambassadors to the discussion and represent your constituency professionally. To cultivate a better discussion, we're not going to be doing a screen share, but if you could have the rules that were sent out available for you to look at, and then I will go ahead and put a link into the chat when I'm done with the introductions so that anybody can go right to our public meeting page and be able to look at those draft rules. Non-committee members will be able to provide public comments during the public hearing, which will take place probably in early December. Committee members, before you speak, please state your first and last name. That way we have it for the record and the audio. So for those of you who are not familiar with the rulemaking process or have not had the opportunity to attend a RAC, and for people listening in, I want to say a few words about the rulemaking process and the purpose of the advisory committee meetings. The purpose of an advisory committee meeting is to increase the public's involvement in the drafting and development of our administrative rules. The Oregon Legislature, through the enactment of the Oregon Procedures Act, or the Administrative Procedures Act, stressed the critical importance of public participation in policy development. Advisory committees are an excellent way to solicit input from internal and external stakeholders who will likely be impacted by the development or amendment of agency policy or rule. The purpose of having all the members on the committee today is to hear from different parts of the industry, public health, and public safety partners. The Commission strives to hear from all interested parties. In our role today, we will explain the background and the context of these rules and the changes that are being proposed in the package. We'll provide facilitation and ensure committee members can provide input today. During this morning's meeting, we'll be seeking your input on the marijuana violation reclassification package. Under Oregon Public Meeting Law, this meeting is open to the public. The members of the public are free to observe our discussion but may not offer comments. The agency will digitally record this advisory meeting and produce and circulate a record of our discussion. However, because the meeting is intended to promote the open exchange of ideas, we will maintain an informal atmosphere in the meeting minutes and record the topics discussed and the main points made. Approximately 1 week after the meeting, we'll be able to distribute the meeting's audio. Does anybody have any questions about the procedure for the Rules Advisory Committee meeting? All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and just let us do introductions real quick. I'm just going to call on people as they appear on the alphabetical order on my screen. So Amy, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Amy Margolis, and I'm an attorney.
Thanks. Annie?
Sorry, I heard Annie. Annie Rothrock with the Wyoming.
Great, thank you. Cedar?
Peter Gray, founder and CEO of Siskey Sungrown OLCC license.
Emily?
Hi, Emily Rowe from the ODA. I'm the contest over there.
Erin?
My name is Erin Purchase, and I am a partner at Kindly Pendleton.
Francisca?
Director with Urban Farms and the Sweet Life.
Gary?
Gary Wright with the OLCC and Marijuana Compliance Technician.
Jeff?
Jeff Sugarman, Chief Compliance Officer, Groundworks Industries.
Jeanette?
Jeanette Ward Horton, New Leaf Project.
Jeremy?
Jeremy Pratt, Nectar Cannabis.
Jesse,
Jesse Bonnecue, co-director of the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association.
Kelly,
Kelly Rout, OLCC, Director of Administrative Hearings Division.
Lee,
Burger. The Medical Marijuana Act, and
Margaret,
Hi, Margaret Flershinger, policy analyst for the medical marijuana program with OHA.
Marianne,
Marianne Kursigi, Alibi Cannabis.
Mike,
Mike Gatlin, founder and director of the Oregon Industry Progress Association and owner of Old Apple Farm. Hi, guys.
Nikki,
Hi, Nikki Terzieff, in cannabis advocate in Salem and working with OIP and other groups.
Nicole,
Hi, I'm Nicole Rappaport. I'm an attorney with Cultiva Law.
Rich,
Rich Evans with OLCC Compliance and Licensing.
Scott,
Scott Winkles with the League of Oregon Cities.
and Will.
Will Rasmussen, partner at Miller Nash, represent a bunch of industry people.
Great, thank you all for being here. Did anybody join after not able to introduce yourselves?
I did, Amanda Metzler, Farms Inc.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, another Amanda Q, Oregon Health Authority, Public Health Division.
Oh, great. So we have a lot of Amandas today on the call. All right, so now that we're done with introductions, we're going to go ahead and start with Rich, and he's just going to give us a little background on this rulemaking package, and then we'll get into the actual rule language.
I appreciate everybody being here. We have a great group here today. Obviously, this started.
Rich, but I wonder, this is Lee Berger speaking. I'm
Hey,
wondering
Lee.
whether the agency received the email from Will with the attached recommendations from the participants in a subcommittee on these issues.
I did this morning. I have not read it yet, but I did receive it.
Thank you. Appreciate your acknowledgement.
You're welcome, Lee. So obviously this has been coming for a long time, as I've stated in the past, that the industry has developed and matured over the year. And when we started and we created these rules not knowing what the system would be, how it would play out. And frankly, a lot of them came with a hammer and a nail in how we dealt with violations. We've heard what the industry said. We worked hard on Senate Bill 408 to try to make sure that we were in alliance or accordance with the industry. And I think there's a lot of collaboration to get where we were on that. But I've been working on this internally with some of our folks for quite some time to try to figure out how we can get to a place where we all have a common understanding of what violations will lead to a loss of license, what violations we can handle informally, and what types of violations we're going to be handling through the Administrative Hearings Division. As I wanted to let you know, we've been working on this, but this is just a start. We have continued internal policy changes that we need to make and work through to implement these. And some of these changes won't be reflected in the rules. They'll just be internal policies. And so what I'm hoping to get out of this today is a lot of feedback from you on these rules. There are additional internal issues that we're going to continue to work on, or internal policies on how we deal with violations, how much ability we give to the inspectors to work with licensees to fix problems without going through a formal process, our VOC program, and even establishing further ability for the inspectors to work with licensees to on lower level of violations, just to make sure that we can gain some voluntary compliance. I want to thank everybody that's given me input so far. I've worked with a lot of you over the years, and I think we're going to get to a resolution where we're at. I'm going to add an additional comment here, is that we are looking at all our violations that are currently in the queue. We have some that go back to 2019. Some of those have been charged, some of those have been not, but I am going through those personally one by one and changing some of those recommendations from formal violations to warnings. And some of them will continue on the path as they are serious in nature. And I want to bring that forward because in the industry, rumors spread fast, but I'm starting with the oldest cases first and moving forward and looking through them and trying to figure out internally what cases are going to go to AHD for charging, and how long is reasonable, a reasonable amount of time to charge a violation after the violation occurs. And so those are all internal processes that I'm working on in tandem with what we have going on today. I want to thank my staff that's here, Gary Wright, Kelly and Amanda, I don't know, and TJ I think is here. A couple other folks that have worked hard on this project and continually listening to the industry. So I'm hoping for some collaborative discussions today. I appreciate the folks that have provided input, and we will go through the rules. And we're obviously open for discussion on where we're at. So that's why we're here today. Again, I want to thank everybody. I'll turn it back over to Amanda.
All right, so we are recording again. It's around 9:30 on Wednesday, October 20th. We have done introductions in a prior recording that stopped. So the attempt, once the recording is posted on our website, we'll be able to have the old recording and then the new recording put together. That is what I'm hopeful I'll be able to do. But we've already gone through introductions, and Rich has given the background on the reclassification packet. And then at this point in time, we were going to turn it over to Kelly to start going through the rule changes with us as a group.
Good morning, everyone. Again, for the record, Kelly Rout with OLCC. If we get cut off again, we'll just pick up where we started. Looks like it's going to be one of those days. A couple days ago, Amanda and I were just talking about how today is a full moon. So I guess we'll just sort of deal with everything as it comes. But we've got a little bit of feedback here. So as a reminder, if you could mute when you're not speaking, that will improve the quality of the recording. Okay, so jumping in. So so Rich mentioned this briefly, but Senate Bill 408 that passed in the 2021 legislature sort of changed the types of violations for which OLCC could cancel a license. And also, as Rich mentioned, OLCC has been looking at updating, the penalties that are imposed, since the inception of the marijuana program. So what we've done, we've gone through the rules that listed a presumptive penalty of cancellation via a Category 1 violation. Those were evaluated and reclassified as necessary. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're amending 11 rules and adopting one new rule. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're just going to go through from the top and go down. Some of these rules, the only change is the actual change of the penalty. There may not be very much discussion, but obviously, any feedback you have. Any questions before we get started? Any questions or comments? And I will see none. I will say that Amanda forwarded the documents that the industry members had submitted, and I briefly looked at them, and I did want to thank you for the time and effort that you put into it, and I think that'll be really helpful to review after the meeting and compare and sort of see where we end up. So with that, The first rule on the list is the marijuana promotional events. This was a rule that listed at least, I think, a couple violations as category 1 violations. And again, it looks like we've got someone who's not muted. If you could mute your, because I'm getting some feedback. Okay. So in this particular rule, we've got 2 sections that are were categorized as category 1. And what we've done for the most part is if it was classified as a category 1, we've switched it to a category 2. We just went one step down. So there are 2 sections in this particular rule that downgrade the category 1 violation to a category 2 violation. And in this particular rule, we did add a section to try and address when people attend a promotional event, because this rule is on promotional events. If they attend a promotional event where there has not been prior approval, and categorize that as a category 1, because technically that is transporting marijuana to an unlicensed location. So that's sort of the overview of this one. So if you're eliciting any feedback or questions on this rule. I saw Jesse raise his hand.
Yeah, so in general, and I know this wasn't one of your recommendations, but the promotional event rule is open. Having tried to organize one of these recently, it is incredibly burdensome. I think overly so for the risk that a promotional event, especially if it's registered with you guys, does. And part of the reason people don't register promotional events is because it's such a burdensome, massive headache. And I would really, really love to work with you guys on enabling at least B2B promotional events. I'm slightly less concerned about public facing, but within the industry, being able to get together, mingle, show off product easily and efficiently is really valuable. And some of the things that I just went through was everybody thought the limitations were too low. The having to have, the reporting of licenses, some of the tracking stuff, all of it is a massive anxiety-provoking experience for the people who are trying to organize it and the licensees. And again, I just don't, for a B2B event, I don't think that there is a lot of problems. I also wanted to, so I just think that that's something to strongly consider. It is, hindering the development of the industry, and I think kind of pointlessly so, and we could all come together and do this better. And then the one thing that, yeah, and that's the main thing. And I'll just stop there for right now. But I really feel like there's a lot of space where this could be improved for the industry and without any risk to public health or safety. And it is really complicated and a giant headache right now and feels like you guys just don't want us to do it. So that's my comment. Oh, and Jesse Bonneke from the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association.
Okay, I'll get to you in just a second. Amy, I just wanted to, this is Kelly from OLCC. Just to confirm, when you say B2B, you mean a business-to-business event?
That is correct. I mean, I also think there's space for consumer-facing stuff to be improved, but definitely B2B.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for the record. Thanks, Jesse. Amy.
So I just wanted to add on to what Jesse said. I know OLCC knows my feeling about these events, having organized, although not for the last 2 years, the summer fair for many years, in addition to a number of other events. I think my suggestion would, separate from the rule, is that for the people who are doing large scale events and who have experience planning and executing those, I think that it is worth having a separate meeting. It does not have to be a rules advisory committee to provide. I mean, I think OCA always successfully pulled that off with a lot of support and help from the OLCC, as well as other B2B events and B2C events. So I think maybe having a separate conversation for those folks who understand the challenges and either have or are interested in throwing those would be really productive. Amy Margolis.
Ali.
I think the category 1 violation is excessive. Lee Berger. I think it should be some other level. I don't understand why simply showing up and displaying products should result in the revocation or cancellation of the license.
Also, I heard recently of a situation where, thank you, I agree with Lee. There's Jesse Bonnicky from Orca. I agree with Lee. I also heard of a situation recently, and I don't know all the details, but where someone went to an event, my understanding is with product that was purchased and bought from the store and properly removed from metric, but that was determined not to matter. And that it was still like a promotional event on behalf of the license. And so if you guys are going to be charging people that way, I'd like to see it reflected clearly and articulately in the rules. I mean, I don't think you should be charging under that dynamic, but like if that's what you guys want to do, it shouldn't be something that people guess at.
I'd like to think that for a category violation that intent, intent is really important. I think in some situations like this, someone could face a license cancellation when absolutely, it could be a paperwork mistake on the part of a lower level employee or something. So I think it's crucial to have the proven intent to divert to be the grounds for a license cancellation. You're great.
Okay, thanks for that feedback. No, that was some good feedback. I am taking notes on all of that. Any other feedback before we move on?
Yeah, Mike Getlin here, OIPA. Just thematically, I think this is a comment that I'll make multiple times, I'm sure you'll hear over again, the intentionality or just reckless disregard for control. So again, in a scenario where you've got a scenario where where we get invited to an event and by no fault of our own, it was represented to us to be properly, licensed or approved by the agency. And then we get a cancellation, something that, might have been slightly careless, but not, flagrant disregard for the rules or intentionality. I don't think that should be grounds for cancellation, and that'll be something that applies to, many of the remaining Cat 1 violations. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike and everyone. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more comments, so I've taken that down. We can sort of take a look at that again. So the next two rules cover cameras. And actually the first rule is 1440, excuse me. And this is one where we have downgraded it from a category 1 to a category 2, but added that if it's an intentional violation, it's a category 1 violation, appropriate camera coverage, and getting into the next rule, sort of maintaining those recordings remains a priority of the commission. It's a really helpful tool, so we do take it seriously. However, we do acknowledge that some of these can be downgraded to the next step, but the intentionality, people intentionally diverting camera coverage, sort of indicates potentially diversion. So any comments on 1440? The changes are in subsection 3 and 4.
I saw Nicole raise her hand.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Nicole.
Sorry, I didn't want to just call out if other folks were trying to speak. Well, first I want to say it's nice to see this downgraded from a category 1 to a category 2. My concern, and somebody spoke on this with the last rule, is using the word intentional. I think without a definition of what that means can be a slippery slope when we're trying to assess whether or not there's intent.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And first off, sorry for not Rich and everybody over at the agency. Sorry for not getting you kind of my memo sooner than late yesterday. Just been slammed over here like everybody else. But when you get the chance to digest it a little bit, you'll see industry suggest that most camera violations drop down to a 3 or below. I personally don't have a qualm with the standard that says if somebody is intentionally messing with their cameras in a way that suggests there might be diversion or something, having that be a type 1. But cameras are a classic example of something that drives industry nuts. Power outages, recording error, server thing where, oops, you've only got 50 days instead of 100 days recorded is a classic example of something that we think if that's all, there was a power outage and that messed up your camera, that coming up with some system to fix it and document the fix, an expansion of the verification of compliance program would be much better suited for encouraging compliant behavior and getting the industry where you want it to be and behaving how you want it to behave, rather than having it a type 1 or a type 2 that could get us back into sucking up people's time and energy in a formal process.
Lee, you go.
Lee Berger, I share the concerns of the previous two speakers, but the problem with the camera stuff in diversion specifically is, first of all, the reasonable grounds to believe, I think, is an inadequate standard. I think if there's actual diversion, then cancellation is appropriate, but not just where the agency thinks it has reasonable grounds to believe that. And second of all, I think it's important to remember in these camera cases, at least in my experience, as often as not, it's a problem with the provider and not the licensee. And the licensee is relying on the provider. And so when Mike and others speak of intentionality, I think that there needs to be some evidence that the person is intentionally not letting the camera cover the areas it's supposed to be covering or not recording it for there to be a violation. So I'd encourage the agency to amend this rule to require those things. Thank you.
This is Rich Evans for the record. So I've read millions of these reports, and they fall into 3 categories that I've seen. And number 1 category is, and we've had a lot of discussion on this rule internally, obviously. So what you're saying is some of the discussions that we've already had is that somebody intentionally turns off the camera for 3 or 4 days and there's diversion that has occurred. That's number 1. Number 2 is the cameras are malfunctioning or not working and the licensee doesn't do anything to fix them. They just kind of take a laissez-faire attitude and things are happening and they'll get to them and they'll get busy. The third one is what Will talked about, when power goes out or a server goes out or some technical glitch happens where it's not in any control of the licensee. When we first started, CanaGuard had those problems and there was those problems. So I kind of, in my own mind, after I've reviewed a bunch of these cases, there's three different kind of pots that these fall into. The issue is trying to figure out exactly what happened and how to fairly treat everybody at the same time when you have to do the investigation to figure out really what actually happened. And so we do have folks, I just read one the other day that they turn their cameras off on purpose. And then we have other ones that, like I said, the second one where cameras aren't functioning, but it's not a big deal and they let things go for way too long and they don't pay attention to it. So those 3 categories are what I see the most of. And I expected some conversation on this and some input, and I haven't been able to read what you guys have, but I did expect that we would have some conversation and some trying to figure out. We don't want to punish people who had a server outage that was out of their control and they properly reported it. That's probably not the best partnership there, but we have to get some language that will cover all 3 of those scenarios and be able to distinguish the 3. So I hope that helps a little bit, but we did have a lot of internal discussions on cameras.
So
I think that helps a lot. We currently have like 12, or depending on how you want to count it, different camera violations. And, the 3 situations you've seen, Rich, sure seem like different situations to me that should be treated, differently.
And just a reminder to go ahead and say your name and introduce yourself before you speak for the record.
This is Jesse Bonhue, but Cedar, do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Jesse.
So I have a couple of things. One, let me start with a technical question. Is there a reason we can't put the VOC language in the rules for when something falls under the VOC program?
Rich Evans for the record. The reason we haven't done that, Jesse, is I want to continue to expand VOC, and then I'd have to open the rules every time I expanded VOC. So until we landed VOC and I knew this process was coming, I didn't want to put them in the rules, so we had to constantly change things. That was the thought process.
Okay, thank you. That was just my technical question. So one of the things that with camera coverage that I think is really challenging is that it is a place where, and I've seen this in some of the VOC program, where it's like an incident could fall totally dependent upon the interpretation by staff into the VOC program or outside of it. And it's also a place where I feel like violations can be stacked very easily. So it's really just one incident, but that one incident comes up as counting as 3 different violations, when it was one accident or one mistake, or an employee forgot to turn on something or hit a switch, and then that's like failure to report, failure to in 24 hours, failure to record for everything for under 30 days, failure to do this, and all of a sudden you have this stacking. And so is it like, then it becomes, well, is it in the VOC, isn't it, what was the actual violation, or is it all of them the violation? And so I think a lot of looking through and sort of saying, looking at one of those incidences that you reviewed and sort of saying, is this actually 3 different violations, or is it one? And that's one of the things I've seen with camera coverage. So for example, it's like the intentional violation is a Cat 1 violation. Well, you're turning it off for diversion. So why is the the voluntary compliance program is, I can't remember exactly if I'm saying that exactly right with VOC, but the voluntary compliance program is what I'm referring to when I say VOC, is the, so getting distracted, coming back. So first off is really making sure it's clear on when something, trying to remove the ability to stack and or layer violations for a single incident. And it is one thing. And then the other thing is we're still having this continuously record 24 hours a day. I've brought this up many times in the past. I'm going to keep harping on it, allowing for motion detection and not storing, recording with a pre 5 minute, post 5 minute, and a log that shows if the camera coverage have ever been messed with would be a reasonable change to that continuous recording thing. Oh, I guess that's the next rule. So I'll withhold that. And I just also want to reiterate that as many of the camera coverage things should be lower, as low as possible. It is a constant headache, and and especially I've heard for some rural folks, it also can be really hard to get someone to come out and service you. And I guess the other technical question I had was the mitigating aspects of all of this. We've talked about it. In general, I think once there should be mitigating credit for when a employee or employer becomes aware of a violation, how they respond. And that can include how quickly they respond, but it is just one of those things, did they have standard operating procedures in place? All of these things could be mitigating factors for some of this. And it would be nice to see some of that more clearly articulated in each rule. And I know that gives people a way of getting around it. I don't think so. People are generally speaking trying to be compliant with this, and I know there's bad actors out there, but this is a huge headache for folks, and and it is a place of large financial risk and burden. So anything we can do to to make it a little bit more reasonable is beneficial overall. And and that's my comment on this one. Jesse from Orca.
Marianne, and then Cedar.
Marianne Kersigi, Alibi Cannabis. So I would like to add on to what Jesse was talking about in terms of the motion detected cameras, because the server requirements and the technical requirements are really quite a bit. So two things that could be done to reduce that would be changing the 90 days to something, say 30, 45, something that doesn't require so much storage. And then also, or instead of doing the motion detected recording. Thank you.
Peter Gray. Jesse touched on this, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. We can't underestimate the complexity, difficulty, and expense of maintaining camera and storage perfection in rural areas. I'm down here in Williams. You know, it is just extremely difficult. Honestly, we cannot find consistent professional technical support down here. We've been very fortunate in that we were able to hire an employee to work at the farm who has IT experience. He actually shows up to the farm every morning at 5 a.m. to make sure that everything's running for us. The complexity is just, it's astounding. The things that we have to deal with in the rural locations. So, you know, any leeway or cushion would be greatly appreciated with these circumstances. Thank you.
Mike Gatlin here, just to jump on that as well. You know, we're in rural Clackamas County, you know, 25 minutes from downtown Portland, but our local telecom provider is the only option. You know, and we're in a situation where when I have to send a PDF, for example, via email, I have to disconnect from our farm's network and send it over my cell phone, because sending a single PDF, the upload speeds are so compromised by our camera feeds that it takes about an hour for one PDF page to upload from our office computers. And so those bandwidth troubles, and there's not a thing we can do about that other than move our farm. Because we're just hemmed in to a single provider. And so those bandwidth troubles, again, you know, it just creates a portion of rule over which licensees have minimal control over their compliance to some extent. So, you know, if we can, and again, I know this isn't the focus of this part of the discussion, but just, you know, one more hat in the ring for looking at motion detected cameras or some sort of decrease in quality requirements or something to just decrease that sheer volume of data we have to upload 24/7. Mike Gatlin, OIPA. Thanks, guys.
I think I saw Amanda have her hand raised, and then I'm going to actually move to the next role just to give you an overview since we've started talking about that one. So go ahead, Amanda, if you have something.
Kelly, I can go ahead. Lee, I'll defer to you. You can go ahead and take my time.
Well, I don't want to take your time. I want you to be able to speak as well. All I wanted to say was I had a similar situation to Mike's in Brownsville, where the internet was down for a week and my client was charged with cancellation. And then I had a question for Rich. Do I understand you to say that we can expect that sometime in the future there'll be a verification of compliance rack for you know, once you've had an opportunity to review the materials Will submitted?
So the verification of compliance program is up and running now and has been for about a year, and where folks are we listed some violations, and some of the camera violations are VOC eligible, where if the inspector decides to enter the program, in which, unless it's intentional, they basically do, they give them so much time to fix the problem. And if they certify they fixed the problem, the licensee does, then the issue just goes away. What we want, and Jesse asked earlier of why we didn't put that in the rule, is because when we first started that program, it's basically a fix-it ticket program, for lack of better terms. We wanted to expand, and I knew this process was coming up. So I wanted to, once we lower some of these violations from 1s or 2s or 3s to 4s, we could add them to the VOC program, so that there would be additional violations that the inspector and the licensee could work out to make sure that we gain voluntary compliance. So we basically did that as an internal process. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask the well, Rich Lieberger. So the timing on it is that the agency is going to be revising the violations and then expanding the verification of compliance program?
Correct.
Thank you. Do you have a timeline on that then?
So this is my project for October, November, December. This is what I'm doing. This project.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Why don't I quickly just give a brief overview of the next rule, 1450, which is the actual like camera storage rule, and then we can continue the discussion on that just to provide some perspective. So the effort was to streamline the penalties in this particular rule. There was a lot of things that were broken out, and we really tried to limit where we would assess a Category 1 violation. So we've combined a number of the subsections into one, so that subsection 4 and 5 were combined, and those are all Category 2 violations. And then the actual part of this rule, which talks about that, you need to keep your recordings for 90 days. We have also tried to streamline that, where we've eliminated the Category 1 if you had it for less than 7 days, because we also, like Rich said, we acknowledge that a lot of times someone might not have that amount of camera recordings through no fault of their own, something, a glitch, an outage, a contractor issue. So often it's less about the number of days and more about sort of the actual conduct, and so trying to pinpoint that. What we've done is eliminated the sort of Category 1 for 7 days or less, kept the Category 2 for anything less than 30 days, and then there's no change to if it's more than 30 days. And I do acknowledge that there is a slight drafting error in there, and that there is nothing for the 30th day, so that will get fixed because we have less than 30 and more than 30. So we'll make sure that that gets corrected. We eliminated the Category 1 for any subsequent violation because that's already contemplated in sort of the progressive discipline. But where we tried to, and I think Lee touched on this already, we created a Category 1 violation where the licensee does not have camera coverage for all or part of those 90 days. And we believe that there's diversion or inversion going on. And I did want to just make clear, because I was looking at this again this morning, this is not expanding the 90 days, because it just says suspected time period, and it doesn't create an additional obligation past 90 days. It's if there's no camera coverage for all or part of the 90 days and there's diversion, that's where we would pursue a Category 1 violation. And I did not identify myself, Kelly with OLCC, and I'll open it up to questions and comments. Amanda.
Kelly, you could probably, Amanda Metzler for the record. Kelly, you could probably answer this. What was the justification, I couldn't remember, between when we initially had 60 days in year 1 and then we switched up to 90 days for it? Because it initially started at 60 for the camera coverage on year 1.
I don't recall. I don't recall 60 days. I don't know if Amanda Borup, do you? I don't know. I think it's always been 90 days.
It hasn't, because I had to go through and change everything. So it was like, if your license was issued prior to August 1st, 2016, then you were allowed to have 60 days, and then you had to upgrade all of your system for 90 days of recording after that, in that very first year of licensing.
Yeah, Amanda, I'd have to look back on the rules to kind of see that. I think, though, it had to do I think it happened when we broke out different violations for different lengths of time. But I would have to look back to know for sure, but I can let you know.
Will.
Thanks. Kelly, I'd read that 30-day thing as if you hit 30 days, you don't get any violation. And it already started counseling my clients that's where we should aim for if you're going to have a video outage. But I guess if you're going to close that, we won't do that. On the discussion a second ago about verification of compliance, VOC, what might be achievable, and I'm very sympathetic to Rich and the folks who don't want to have to run back and change administrative rules every time they're trying to create a more streamlined system. what might be achievable in this process is just a paragraph of rulemaking that says the agency can have a verification of compliance program, and for violations below a certain threshold, I would probably pick 3 or lower. Those can, not necessarily will, but can qualify. That would at least provide some rulemaking basis for what, to me, has been a very successful program for the agency to try to reduce workflow and get folks into a documented compliance state quicker. Just a suggestion.
Thanks, Will. Anyone else have any discussion? I am looking for hands, but yeah, Jesse.
This is Jesse Bonahue with Orca. Just to reiterate, the reducing the amount of camera storage is incredibly valuable. Doing the motion sensing might be one option, but anything that reduces the terabytes of data that people have would be helpful, especially because it is challenging also for you if somebody has 90 days of data. That's hours and hours of video that is to review. The other thing I have is, I guess in general, anytime you reduce a category or reduce a violation to a lower violation level, that is a good thing in general. Just wanted to state that. But like some of this is, again, where reading through this is where like the stacking seems to happen, where like if someone, for example, I remember in the VOC program, one of the qualifications is you can fix the error. Well, if someone has lost their data, does that enable them to fix, what counts as fixing the error? If they turn the camera back on, is that fixing it? Or if they are able to store data again, they've lost the data, there's no way to recover it. How, so an incident, does that qualify for the VOC or not? It's sort of like you must keep your surveillance. I don't know, there's just things in here where if something went wrong, it would fall under 4 of these things. And so that's where I just wanted to be sure. And I think the only other thing I was going to say is there a way to get some sort of mitigating qualification for if your video camera program was approved by the OLCC, they can't be punished for it later? Because I've heard of several stories, and they all could be, fishtails, but where, someone has an approved video monitoring thing and the approved areas and all things like that, and then somebody else shows up and tells them they're doing it wrong and they get a violation. So correct me if I'm wrong, but anybody else, if you heard of similar stories, please speak up. But that's one of the places where, a clarity on what mitigating factors are would be helpful in some of these.
I see a comment from Mike. Are you wanting to say something?
Yeah, and I apologize. Mike Getlin here, OIPA. I'm having a very hard time figuring out where the hand raise mechanism on this thing is, so my apologies, guys. A question for you guys at the agency. I think that there's always a difference in perception and reality of how these things are handled. And I think we in the industry have a tendency to have, possibly an overly negative perception of the intent behind the handling of some of these violations when they're targeted at us. So I guess my question is this: when you guys are looking at one of these camera related violations, is there a process in place by which there is an additional look at metric data for inconsistencies to see if there is a deeper, kind of a deeper problem that is arisen as opposed to just a mistake on cameras? Is that something that's institutionalized and automatically done as part of these investigations, or are the camera violations charged as standalones typically?
I probably can answer that with evidence for the record. I would tell you that it depends on the circumstances and what, there's no procedure where we go through all metric after a camera outage. But I will tell you that depends on the outage, depends on the circumstances. We may do a look into metric to see if there's any outlying activity during the camera outage, for sure. But I wouldn't say, Mike, there's a correlation that there's a standard procedure on every investigation. You have to remember, we get hundreds of camera outages at times when during a power storm or a surge or the ice storm or other times. So there's, we don't require that on every case, but we definitely do look at it if there are some suspicious circumstances. And I don't know if you can see that Amy has her hand up, Kelly. That's what I can see on my screen.
I just noticed that. Thank you. Go ahead, Amy.
Amy Margolis, I just want to briefly say, and I don't think it's particular to this, but Jesse brought it up, that I think that the stacking of violations is something that I've also seen, although I would have to go back and look at how those were settled. But I think that that's a place where we could borrow something from criminal law and consider maybe addressing that through some sort of like merger, right? So in criminal law, if you've got two incidents or two crimes that happen from the same incident and they're kind of under the same umbrella, those sentences will merge. And I think it's something for us to consider. I know we have the Oregon State Police folks on and other people who do criminal defense, and I don't want to get us sideways, but I think for a later date, that's a kind of more holistic problem beyond just the video cameras, or at least an issue that I've come across, and I think it's something we could look at later.
I have a question is, you guys, Rich, you guys don't always use, this is Jesse from Orca. Rich, you guys don't always do a deep dive into metric, but could a licensee use their metric as a way of proving that they weren't doing anything illegal? Like, is metric considered a reliable source to prove that you did not do any diversion?
I never really even thought through that process, Jesse, or how you would provide that information. But we have had a long discussion internally on mitigating circumstances, on how we deal with mitigating circumstances, period. And so I think that'll probably come up later in the discussions today or part of the other, but I will note that down as an avenue in the future to think about on mitigation. I think that's one of the hardest things is putting these things in every violation in the proper category and violation term, and then figuring in mitigation. I've heard a lot from the industry on, if a licensee is doing everything right, training their employees, and then the employee acts out on their own independently, how much responsibility does a licensee have and how much responsibility is a permittee having? And so I think there's some work to be done on mitigation in totality, Jesse.
Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Will Rasmussen, Miller Nash. I think the sooner the agency can get away from mechanical stacking, and in reality, I think it already has, but get the rules away from mechanical stacking of, small violation. Having a rule that says if you have 3 small violations, you're supposed to get your license pulled, would both be accurate and helpful to let licensees sleep at night. For example, if you've got, 3 composting errors and a camera outage, I don't think many people, certainly from the industry and probably from the agency, think that person should have their license pulled. But if somebody has one issue that suggests they're intentionally diverting, intentionally giving cannabis to kids, doing something really bad that implicates health and safety, pull them on one. I just really think that little table that says small violations should result in cancellation is unhelpful, particularly when you're talking about a mature licensee with 20, 30 locations. It causes people to lose sleep at night and makes it hard for our successful businesses to grow elsewhere.
Thanks, Will. This is Kelly from OLCC, and this is all really good feedback. And later on in the rules, in the penalty section, we do have a section for mitigation, which we've expanded based on Senate Bill 408. So we can certainly have some more discussions there, which will. And I will say, sort of as a matter of practice, we do, to the extent that we have information at the time of charging about mitigating factors, those are considered and decisions are made whether to charge or not to charge. And I think, I think with the passing and the effective date of Senate Bill 408, there will be more of that on the front end to the extent that we have the information. And then, of course, we always welcome any sort of submissions from licensee about mitigating circumstances. So I'll put a pin in that because we'll be talking about that in a little bit. I just want to throw it out one more time to see if there's any more feedback on the proposed penalties for cameras. If not, we'll move on to the next chunk of rules. And I'm not seeing anything. So the next 6 rules, starting with 2040 through 7540, there are 6 rules where basically the only change is that we have changed the category 1 to a category 2 because these are rules that would no longer qualify to be a cancelable offense. Some of these rules are rules that the commission has not charged. They're about registration to produce usable marijuana for patients, those types of things. So they are not common violations. The only common violation actually is 7540, which is the seed to sale tracking. That's a very common violation. That base penalty remains a category 3, but the intentional violation has been reduced from a 1 to a 2. So on that sort of chunk of rules, any questions or comments? And if I didn't say it, this is Kelly from OLCC. I've got to be better about that. If not, I think we'll move to the where there's like sort of the meat of a lot of the changes to these rules. And the first one is 8520. And this is actually where we're eliciting some feedback from industry. And the rule that I'm specifically referring to is the access to premises. So it is a basis to deny a license if licensee does not have, the applicant doesn't have legal access to the place where they want to operate. But once they're licensed, we do have situations where licensee loses access, sometimes through no fault of their own. It could be greedy landlord or something like that. And so that is, if they lose access, there is a mechanism that's set forth in that rule that allows them to change location, if they can do it fairly quickly. Sometimes that's not an option. We do have the ability to refuse to renew the license, but that often comes down to a timing issue. So the rule that has been in place is that it is a category 1 violation if the licensee no longer has access, that we can go in and propose cancellation. Because often what happens is that the landlord wants to rent it out to someone. Sometimes this licensee is just like in the wind, and they might have even left product at the premises. The landlord wants to take over, but the landlord can't take possession of that marijuana because it's not theirs, and they don't have a license. So they once they take possession, they're sort of facing sort of violation of possession limits, which is criminal. So we're trying to find like these situations are they come up, they're very unique, they're very time sensitive sometimes. But in trying to deal with the penalty, I was just curious if there was any feedback. What we proposed was that if to sort of draw the line with whether or not there's product at the premises. Apologies, my dog has decided to start playing. So I'm gonna try and get him out of here in a second. So we, thinking that if there was product at the premises or in inventory, that is more serious and would be a category 1 because the risk of diversion is greater. But if there wasn't any, to have that be a lower violation. So I'm going to stop talking there and see if anyone has any feedback on that, because we are sort of curious what industry thinks about this particular charge.
Just
Annie, go ahead. Oh, Jesse and then
we are lost, so I didn't want people to start talking before I could figure out where we were. What page are we on in the rules?
1 second. We are, the specific language is on the bottom of page 18. Yeah. It's 8523 3C, little c.
Annie Rothrock with Wild. This seems to be going in the opposite direction of, I think, what's intended and burdensome on the licensee. If our landlord decided if he decided to like change the locks and lock our building and there's product inside, why should we be penalized for that as opposed to if there's no product inside? And this is to, it wouldn't be, you wouldn't be charging him with taking the property and the product. You would be damaging the licensee for something that's out of their control. So I think this is kind of opposite of what was intended, or at least that's how I'm reading it.
I mean, this is Kelly with OLCC. That's the thing with this particular rule is that the number of scenarios are so varied that we hear about, like, you know, that's the type of thing where we likely would try and work with the licensee to be able to, you know, get their license transferred, and that, you know, obviously there would be sort of the separate course of action against the landlord for taking their product. So that's one situation, but we also have the situations where the licensee, you know, loses access because they didn't pay their rent, they're in the wind, they've left product there, or they've taken product with them, or they've kept it in their inventory, and we need to sort of lock that down so that they can no longer have the privilege of having their license. And so there's just a lot of varied circumstances. It's like a not one size fits all, but at the end of the day, a licensee that does not have legal access to the premises is not eligible for a license because it's a basis to deny the license. So yeah, that's where we're at. I'm trying to find sort of an equitable way to deal with the situation that makes sense and that doesn't necessarily penalize the licensee, but just sort of gets the situation resolved so that we don't have diversion or, you know, people trying to take possession of a product that they can't take possession of. And you guys have great minds. Let's see, anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, Scott.
We can't hear you, Scott. This is Jesse. I generally agree with Annie that this is and with Kelly that this is that we're going in the wrong direction on this, but I also understand, Kelly, that there's lots of complicated situations on this. And I guess I'd be curious, you know, if there was a way to just add some clarity on when a license might be suspension versus canceled. Because I can sort of get that if someone's lost control of their product, that they should at least be suspended. So like, you know, or something, but you know, there's also a lot of chaos that can happen in these situations, and sort of some horror stories connected to people selling businesses out from underneath it. So it's not, you know, sometimes it's not even that they're original landlord, it's that the landlord sells the business and then the next person comes in and buys not the business, but sold the property to somebody else, and that person who comes in is really aggressive and cruel to the cannabis license holder and causes a lot of chaos. And so just as long as there's, you know, I would just fight for clarity on when a license isn't going to be canceled under the circumstances described. And or ability of the OLCC to work with them, because because I do get your point, Kelly, that it is weird for you guys to have a licensee who doesn't have access to product that is in technically their metric or in their facility that they don't have control over anymore.
I heard Jeanette pop up, and then after that, Alex Tinker wants to make a comment, but he is off camera, so he can't. So go Jeanette, and then Alex.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand. So I agree with what Jesse said. I've seen it happen out for, like, the rug gets pulled out from underneath a licensee, and it's a lot of chaos. And I like how, Jesse, I just would like to, what I wanted to say is I want some, if possible, more certainty. You said likely will work with the licensee, Kelly. Understanding what's that likelihood? When is that scenario? Because it does create a lot of angst for licensees, and then, you know, we don't see every violation play out the same for every licensee. So the more clarity we have around when you're working with people is helpful.
Thanks, Jeanette. Before I go to Alex, does not appear to be a raise hand feature in GoToMeeting like there is with Zoom and Teams. And so I think people, sorry. So you either have to, like, if you're on camera, physically raise your hand or just jump in. So I'll turn it over to Alex now.
Alex Tinker, Tonkintorp. I'm so relieved that I wasn't missing the raise hand feature. I just wanted to comment that appreciate the concerns and the need to have tools, but it would seem to me that in those scenarios you described where the licensee has lost access to the premises and there's some other awful thing happening that needs to be stopped, that there are so many other rules that there'd be violations of there, that those tools already exist. And so having this additional means that could be misapplied in a situation where licensee at no fault creates more of a risk of overcharging or inappropriately charging than it does provide a necessary tool for OLCC to regulate in those situations where there is a real.
Thanks, Alex. This is Kelly with OLCC. And yes, that is true. Yeah, for some circumstances, what I've seen is that every sort of question that comes to me just has a different flavor, which just makes this challenging. To answer part of Jeanette's question, in the access to premises subsection, there is an exception under Rule 1160 sub 4 that if the licensee has been evicted and can provide notification to OLCC, we can help effectuate a change of location. If the licensee, assuming that the licensee has another location to go to, or potentially help facilitate a transfer of product to a wholesaler to sort of hold until they can get a new location. I think those are the situations where we acknowledge that we just need to make sure that the marijuana is accounted for and do try. But like I said, so many different flavors of licensees just going in the wind. They aren't, if they could just surrender their license, that would be great, but they don't. So I acknowledge that it's like not a one size fits all. And so anyway, I do appreciate the feedback so far. Any other feedback on that? I know that Scott able. Oh, go ahead, Annie.
Oh, I just want to make sure Scott got to say something. But
I was just saying that, but I think he dropped off. I think he might have been having technical difficulties. So if I see him join again, I will make sure to get his feedback. Okay. So the next rule that we have is at on page 21, and this is our new rule. Senate Bill 408 did create the ability for OLCC to take action against the licensee for what's considered a history of lack of institutional control, which may potentially get to some of the stacking concerns that we have heard. And a lot of times there is a lot of stuff going on at a premises that may have arisen from like one visit by an inspector, or there's just ongoing problems. And so what we have done here is taken, sort of looked at the language that we have for our, the sort of companion violation on the liquor side, which is a history of serious and persistent problems, and sort of taken some of the language from that statute as well as some of the contested case precedent for that, which has the force and effect of law, and sort of created the bones of a violation for the history of lack of institutional control. And in it, so it's basically looking at, there's like an ongoing problems that are either serious or persistent. Licensee may not have the willingness and ability to control the premises. We sort of lump all of these individual incidents into one, propose to cancel the license. But as to sort of accompany that, we also have on the liquor side and have achieved some, quite a bit of success with is what we call an enforceable compliance plan. Sometimes we may have a situation where it's the issue, the incidents are on the line, like, do we charge a violation? Could we get by with a warning? Will that achieve compliance? And sometimes what tips the scale is to create an enforceable compliance plan, sort of a document that, certain things that licensing needs to comply with in order to keep them on track. So we have that in rule on the liquor side. The language worked, and so I ported it over to this. My one comment that I will make, I got some good feedback from my staff just yesterday that the timelines in the enforceable compliance plan, we may need to lengthen those for marijuana. I think just, this is a new program. The stuff on the liquor side is pretty well established. So we'd be willing to extend those timelines. But this is new, so I just thought I'd see if you guys have any questions or feedback on this particular charge. Will first, go ahead, and then Annie.
I was just going to comment, as somebody who's dealt with the compliance plan for industry over on the alcohol side, it can be a nice different system program if you have a client business who has the ability to kind of get their act together following a big incident and put together a plan and implement it. The one thing I would suggest and really like to see in this is to have some target back end of, you're in the plan for like, you know, a year or 2 years, and then unless OLCC re-ups it, it drops off.
Okay, thanks, Will. Annie and then Lee.
Annie Rothrock Wild. I just wanted to point it out. There is a second that after believe in line 3 of the rule, but also to repeat what Will said, yeah, there needs to be an end date. I feel something like a proof of institutional control has been reached, and then the compliance plan can be dropped, and possibly even the after proof of being in compliance for X number of years, the actual violations are dropped off the record as well. And you can start with a clean slate. Thank you.
This is Jesse Bonneke with Orca.
You're muted, Kelly.
Thank you. Before we go to Lee, I just Annie, I did not catch the first part of what you said. I think, did you identify an error or something? I just didn't catch it.
In line 3, the first paragraph, it says reasonable ground to believe that there's a history of a lack of institutional control.
Thank you. Let's go with Lee next.
Lee Berger, I had a concern with how vague that language is to allow cancellation of a license. And it struck me as violative of due process. And I don't know whether that's been challenged on the alcohol side or not, but I think the standard reasonable grounds to believe there's a history of a lack of institutional control is, you know, as a legal matter, I think it's unconstitutionally vague, or at least susceptible to that kind of a challenge. And as a practical matter, I think it vests in the commission too much discretion in having the ability to initiate cancellation. Those are my concerns.
Rich Evans for the record. Lee, one of the issues with this is what we don't want to do is say you get so many ones, so many twos, so many threes, and you automatically go into this process, because sometimes those may be one event or 2 events, and that doesn't show a lack of institutional control. I think it would be easier to, you know, come up with a formula of how many violations is lack of institutional control. But if you do that, you box the commission into certain activities where we may see a violation where it's a serious violation or a series of violations. But what if it was an employee that was fired or terminated that didn't follow any training, but they still met the criteria? You're putting businesses into a box that they shouldn't be into. And so that's where it's really difficult. You can, you know, on the alcohol side, it's basically fact-based. You know, you have to come up with all the facts, and usually it's tons of bar fights, tons of police calls, people are shooting people in the driveway or in the bar, those type of things. It's a factual laid out of all the issues. And so it may be vague here, but if you look at a history case on the alcohol side, it's 15, 20, 25, 40 violations within a period. What I do not think is appropriate, and this is just Rich, and I'm throwing it out there, is where we just box everybody in to say so many violations of this type, you get flipped to the history, because each individual case has mitigating factors. And so that's why That's why it may sound vague here, but if you look at a history case on the alcohol side, they're pretty significant. There's some issues going on there. So we were trying to capture with the 408 language, when you go away from cancellation, if you don't do the major 5 or 6 things, you can't get canceled. But what if you're doing 20 or 30 of the other violations within a couple of, I'm just throwing out numbers, but what if you have a bunch of serious events and you just aren't controlling the premises? Though that I believe the commission needs a way to at least review the circumstances and be able to work through that. So that's the background of that. I'll turn it back over, but I expected this conversation, and like I said, that's the reason there's no matrix. Like you get so many of these, so many of these, so many of these, because every case is different. And so
I'm not asking for a matrix, Rich. I'm suggesting that you need to strike the words "or has reasonable grounds to believe." I think that's what makes it vague.
what would you replace it with, Lee?
I don't think you can replace it with anything. I think the commission has to make that finding.
Okay.
To be able to initiate a cancellation proceeding. I mean, I appreciate the remediation part of it. I mean, that makes sense. That's consistent with the other program. But I just am concerned. I just am concerned about the vagueness of the reasonable belief. If that, I understand, and I see what you're saying about how that could work in a regulating a bar, but even though those of us who worked on Measure 91 had expected that we'd be able to walk into a store and sample, just like I can walk into a Fred Meyer and sample wine.
My name's Pat. I know everyone hates me call.
Even if we could,
you just give me 60 seconds of your time, you can change your potential life.
We're getting a little bit of feedback. If everybody could go ahead and mute right now.
You actually must do something different. And that's what this message is all about.
I think the auto
change a job or a business that doesn't fulfill you or provide the freedom or security. This is your opportunity to change that.
Hi, that was awkward. So I think that you just need, I understand how that could come up in the context of a liquor store, or not a liquor store, but a bar. But if for a cannabis store, there isn't sampling, and even if there was, it's not, the poison that alcohol is that makes people violent. It's cannabis. So there isn't going to be fights and police calls and the rest of it. If there were the sampling that, those of us who drafted the law intended to be allowed at the location. So that's why I think you should just strike "or reasonable grounds to believe." I think it would require a finding for the cancellation action.
Alex Tinker here with Tonkin Torp piping in because I can't raise my hand. Just to put what Mr. Berger said another way, a reasonable grounds to believe that there's no institutional control might be a good reason to charge this, but to actually say the license can be taken away based not on there actually being a loss of control, but on there being a reasonable grounds to believe there's a loss of control, it just seems to go too far. And I agree with Lee on that point, that the commission ought to make a finding that there has been a loss of control to take a license away, not just prove that they reasonably think the licensee might have.
Had her hand up, and then Will.
So first, I'm not sure if it was Rich or somebody else who made the comment about how a matrix is would be difficult. This is Nicole Rappaport, by the way, for those who can't see. I don't necessarily disagree that a matrix can be complicated, but I'm going to piggyback on Lee's initial comment that I feel like the language here is too overly broad, and not just on the reasonable grounds piece. That I think can be viewed as being overly broad, but also there's so many terms here that are undefined. What defines a reasonable ground? What defines a history? What defines institutional? What defines control? All of these things can be broken down, and if they're not broken down, I think this is going to be really complicated for the OLCC to try to actually implement. And I think the reality is if this is the language that ends up being implemented, how this is going to play out in real life is going to be a cluster, to be honest. I think the OLCC is kind of asking for more chaos than what they're expecting with this.
This is Will Rasmussen. I tend to agree with Alex and Lee about striking that that particular phrase regarding reasonable grounds to believe. I think with that struck out, you just land on the typical burden of proof which the agency would have, which is just a preponderance of evidence, which if you're going to pull somebody's license, it seems like you should at least have that. I would also suggest like putting a 2-year look back on this, so folks aren't, wondering about, oh geez, I took a violation in 2018 that seemed like no big deal, and now I can't sleep at night. And as I agree with Nicole as well, I'm not really sure what this thing means in this context. If the agency does adopt this, I think it would be very wise to reference that we're trying to apply the same standard that exists over in alcohol, because there is a bunch of case law in alcohol about, a shooting and 5 fights might be enough. I don't think those are really issues I've seen, at least with my clients anyway. People buying cannabis are more chill than people going and getting bombed at my other clients' establishments. So I think referencing to that alcohol standard would be helpful for everybody here, both the agency and the industry.
Jesse, and then I know Scott had a comment earlier, so we'll go back to him once Jesse's gone. Thanks.
So in relation to this rule, I agree with everything that Nicole and Will and everybody else who has said. The vagueness does concern me seriously, and clarity would be incredibly helpful, because I'm not a lawyer, but if I was, I sometimes play one on TV, is like I wouldn't know how to advise my client reading this, like especially if they had a violation in the past or maybe 2 small violations. I don't know what they would, what to tell them about how likely they are to lose their license. And that is, and I know of some people who are fighting violations, not because they can't afford the fine or the penalty or because they think they're innocent, but simply because they're so terrified of creating a history of lack of control that'll be used against them in the future, because they can't guarantee their staff aren't going to make mistakes again in the future. They can't make, and so that their whole thing is they're opening themselves up to a huge liability that could hinder their ability to sell their company or to get investors or anything else if they have this, what could have been an innocent, relatively innocent violation. I'm not trying to say it didn't happen. I'm just trying to say it was, within the norms. And it's not saying you guys are trying to create that situation with this. I just, because of the vagueness of this, I wouldn't know how you would counsel them that they're going to be okay, or what to expect, or what levels, or what their actual risk is in the situation, or how they would explain it to potential investors or anything else. So I agree with everyone else on the vagueness and providing clarity. I also heard what Rich was saying about, not wanting to lock some of this stuff in. But I also think that, a lot of this is covered in other, in other places and violations. So really what we're talking about is not what that level of violation is about when do those other small violations lead up to losing your license, right? And I just think that currently the vagueness, it makes me a little bit, it makes me very uncomfortable. And so I think there's that piece, and I guess the other piece about this is I think you're picking up on some of the anxiety from the industry, who has seen sort of enforcement actions that feel, whether it's true or not, but feel directed by the personality of an enforcer or the personality of a licensee, and not some of the facts on the ground. And and so I think that what we're trying to do is, as much as possible, is create clarity and predictability and consistency. And we worked with you guys on this because we understand that sometimes there are people who just, they have proven to you without a doubt that they are not able to run a business of a regulated product. And so, you know, we heard you, and we want to find a way for this to work for you, but we also want to provide clarity and understanding to everyone else who, you know, doesn't really deserve to get caught up in this dynamic. I would like to double down on Annie and Will's initial comments about having a, you know, clarity on the ending of the period when it starts, and clarity on when, like, you might be subject to this, especially, you know, reiterating the statute limitations conversation that we've started, and how that could be really valuable within this. And I also think that, you know, Rich brought up something that, you know, is why we've talked about the stacking issue, is that this is the type of situation where a single incident can have, the impact of a single incident having multiple violations can be really detrimental. And then finally, I'm reading this, and I can read it as this would only apply to one license at a time, but I just want to be explicit that I think the lack of extrajudicial control, you know, should be limited to each individual license and not a license holder. So if you have 40 licenses, you should, you know, and have 10, you know, Cat 3 violations. I don't want that across 40 stores or 20 stores or 20 licenses. That's not the same thing as having 10 violations across one. And so I really think it should be license specific.
Will, and then Amanda. Oh, you know what? Actually, sorry, Will, hold on a second. I said that I would have Scott. He was unable to provide a comment earlier, so I'm gonna let him jump in if he wants to, and then you'll go next, Will.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. I'll reference to the access piece. I think I'm fine.
Okay, thanks, Scott. And if you, Will, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just piggybacking on Jesse's point about this being directed per license, per location. That's actually how I read this rule. So question to agency friends. I mean, it says any license and per premises. I sure read that as applying per location as opposed to a death sentence for somebody with 30 licenses.
This is Kelly with OLCC. That's correct. We really can only charge like one license at a time. Like we may be able to, it's for one license. There might be, I will say that, you know, let's say you have a vertically integrated company and there's a lot going on, but we can sort of attribute things to those companies, and there's a lot going on at each of those vertically integrated companies. There may be 4 separate charges for 4 separate licenses. That's always a possibility, but the intent of this is per license. And Amanda, you're up next.
Thanks, Kelly. Amanda Metzler for the record. That was my question, was about individual licenses. There is some optics, especially when it comes to farms, of multiple farm holders having these violations at all of their farms, which kind of presents a lack of institutional control for an individual singular, you know, small farm. When they see these come out, the optics look pretty terrible. That's what it seems for it. So while I understand it's individual licenses, having those happen at multiple farms across the spectrum doesn't breed credibility for the farmer doing it right, where they kind of we view it as a little bit of a pass. They're able to pay that big money, and it appears that they have lost control over their multiple farms.
We're about halfway through our conversation, so it might be good just to take a quick 5-minute break, stretch our legs, and then but we're getting near the end, although there might be a pretty robust conversation about penalties. And then we've got a couple other unrelated rules at the very end. So why don't we reconvene a little after 10:45? Thanks, everyone. Okay, we'll go ahead and get back to it. I'll just do a little, I'm sure people will trickle back. So we've got, like I said, we've got one rule left, plus our sort of penalty exhibit. And then I'm actually going to hand it over to Amanda to talk about some other rules. So the next rule that we have, it's at the bottom of page, or middle of page 22, 8590. It's basically what we call our penalty rule. And we've made the change. I'll just go quickly over the changes that are proposed here. So first step is, well, one's just a technical change. I noticed that in section 1, it talks about who we can suspend or cancel, but we did not have laboratory licenses there. So I thought we would include that. That's a technical change. And then the second, so subsection 2, under Senate Bill 408, we can cancel a license for specific itemized violations, but then other violations of our statutes and rules we can cancel only if there is a significant risk to public health and safety. So thought it would be a good idea to sort of provide clarity to the industry via rule as to what the commission considers to be a significant risk to public health and safety. And sort of created this list by going through the existing sort of categorized violations that were considered category 1s that didn't fall into the camp of diversion or minors or dishonest conduct, and added those there because in the commission staff's opinion these are pretty serious, and so there's a number of them, and so that's the first sort of major change here. And then the next sort of major change is that we have added in and under the mitigating circumstances, which is new 5D, the Senate Bill 408 created some mitigating circumstances, and we just took that language and added it here. So those are the main changes here. So we'll talk about this, and then we'll get into the actual penalty exhibit after we discuss that. So I'm going to open it up, and I see Annie and then Jesse.
Annie Rothrock, Wild. I would say subsection F, if somebody is knowingly supplying adulterated marijuana items, that would be a good clarification. If something were to get out into the market on accident and a retailer was supplying it to customers without knowing, that's a trickle-down effect to the supply chain that this could pose a problem if it's just supplying as opposed to knowingly supplying.
Thanks, Annie. Oh, and I'm sorry, before I get to you, Jesse, I did want to say that I know that I've already mentioned that I saw the industry subcommittee's recommendations. So I definitely want to take a look at those and sort of see how they line up, because I appreciate your guys' feedback and sort of see where there may need to be tweaks to be made. So those will, after we have the rec, we'll definitely look at those, and if we have any updates, we can send out another draft. But take it away, Jesse.
So first, I just wanted to make one more comment about the last rule before we move on. I was trying to, and we got cut off. I understand that there's a lack of institutional control, that this is a complicated thing. This, I'm not sure if other people agree with me, but one potential way of clarifying is if there was a series of administrative opinions issued on 5 different scenarios. In general, I think it would be nice to see some administrative opinions on an interpretation of rules more regularly, but that also might help specifically with something as complicated and nuanced as institutional lack of control. I don't think that that's a substitute for fixing some of the vagueness, but it might be a substitute for fixing, for fixing all the vagueness, but it might be a substitute for fixing some of the vagueness on that one. And then the lack of control of premise, there was one final thought I wanted to say, which is if this is really as serious as it is to you guys, then I would also ask you to look at your under what circumstances and how you provide people opportunity to survive that chaos that comes with that, and making that easier for people to comply with and have access to is a process for them being able, when they do lose control for issues beyond them, that they make that really easy. But getting into, and that was just before we moved on, I wanted to touch on those 2 things. And I'm done now. Jesse from Orca.
Thanks. Any other comments? Feel free to pipe up or. Raise your hand on camera. If not, I can get an overview of the next couple pages, which is starting at page 26. So this is not actually it's an exhibit to 8590. And the chart at the top is accessible on the Secretary of State website if you click the link. And this is sort of where we set out the penalties. So there is what we've done here. Let me just scroll to my notes really quick. Because of the reclassification, we have a number of more category 2 violations, or at least that's what we're recommending for some of these. And first off, so the presumptive penalty for a category 2 violation is a mandatory suspension. That is a penalty that hits different licensees differently. It is much more of an impact to a retailer or even a wholesaler than it is to a producer. And we have seen some producer licenses potentially try to sort of drag out a contested case so that, and this is obviously going to apply more to outdoor producers, but that they sort of get to a time where they can serve a suspension when there is no ability, it's like dead of winter. So it's not really, like there's a violation on the record, but there really isn't a penalty. So there was an interest by staff to potentially assess civil penalties against producers, and then also potentially start the penalties for the other license types at a lower penalty to begin with, since a 30-day suspension is an impact. So this is out there for discussion. It was just sort of a suggestion that we came up with, because I would be curious to hear what industry's thoughts are on that. And then before we move on, what we actually used to have on the liquor side, and I think it's actually not there anymore, but I think it's sort of touched on in Senate Bill 408, is to potentially create a list of what's categorized, so that people can sort of see it at a glance, like what are considered category 1, category 2, whether they're classified or the commission has not classified them but has sort of considered them. So this is a start to a list. It's not, I don't think we're ever going to include every single violation, because that would be a really long list. So we tried to limit it to like common and also priority violations, because some priority violations like illegal exportation are not common, but they are priority. So we tried to just sort of lay those out. I will note for the record that in category 2, I did make an error. That the reference to 2070 should actually be 2040. That will be updated in the language. So that's the changes. Those are all the notes that I had on that. So I'm going to turn it over to see what people have to say. I see Cedar first.
I understand the concern about outdoor processor trying to drag their feet until wintertime. That being said, I want to mention that a suspension even during the wintertime is a significant penalty. The inability to process or sell products is a very significant penalty. It wouldn't be a serious, obviously a growing season suspension would be a killer. It could actually kill a business, but even a wintertime suspension, especially in time of tough markets like now, is very significant. That's all I wanted to say. Cedar Gray.
Yeah.
Jeff Sugarman, Groundworks Industries. I guess my question is around the timeliness of when violations are going to get charged. If a company is getting a violation notice 18 months after an incident occurred, how are we supposed to deal with that? And how are you guys going to, how is the agency going to be able to try and deal with all of these different violations in a very similar fashion?
Well, Jeff, Rick Evans for the record. Sorry, Kelly, I couldn't get off mute. Internally we're looking at this, Jeff. To be honest with you, when we started marijuana, we didn't know how many violations were going to come in, and then obviously we had some COVID issues and some other things that led to some delays. We're currently looking internally at how soon we will charge violations. I'm looking at violations, like I said in the beginning, that are several years old and still in the process, and we're going to try to hit some internal benchmarks. I'm working on that, and I'm working on this as my October, November, December project. So I will be making a presentation at the commission meeting tomorrow, discussing some violations that will be turned to warnings. And we'll be doing that probably at every commission meeting for the next several months to try to get some of the backlog gone, and then look at it internally. We did get approval for through this legislative process for 4 more case presenters, which will help us down the road. But we're looking at low-level violations that have passage of time, and we're frankly just moving those from formal discipline to warnings based upon totality of circumstances.
Thanks, Rich. I appreciate that. And I guess I'm more looking going forward as we implement these new violations. If the agency
Rich Evans for the record, going forward, we're going to set an internal timeline of when and how long we will take to charge a violation. And we haven't landed on that number yet. I've heard 6 months, I've heard a year, I've heard, but we're looking at that. I don't want to give a date because I'm not sure how it's going to land. I actually want to go through each and every case that we're pending and charging and looking at those, and then come up with a recommendation once we hire the new case presenters. Frankly, hiring new case presenters is awesome, but it also slows down our case presenters that we have because they have to train them. So it's a double-edged sword. So I'm looking at trying to wrap all this up by December.
Thank you.
I saw Amanda, then Will, and then I think Jesse.
Amanda Metzler for the record. Kelly, can you just, I think I missed it, why the farmer has the fee and not just the days? Why isn't it 15 days or $7,500?
I think because they might just choose the suspension at a time where it's
it's
more convenient for them, and then there's really
there's
really
no penalty.
Yeah, there's no penalty. So
okay, I have a follow-up question. For category 2 violations for lying to the commission, these will also be applicable to worker permits is what I'm asking. There's a rampant thing happening of lies and things happening at facilities for farms done by workers, and there hasn't been any repercussions for them for that. So my question to you is, if someone made a false complaint to the OLCC as a staff member saying diversion was happening on someone's farm, and then a full investigation happened and that was found to be false, would that worker permit be subject to a category 2 violation because technically they lied to the commission by making a false report?
This is kind of OLCC. Historically, the charge has been, they're making a false statement to the commission, about sort of, and there's criteria. It has to be a material false statement, like it's, a basis to cancel or deny a license, or, it's intentional. It's not, but we've not really gone with making a false report. A lot of times we get complaints from disgruntled employees and we investigate those complaints, and sometimes it turns out to be nothing, but we look at complaints, but we wouldn't, in my time that I've been here, we have not taken action against someone who makes a complaint that turns out to be unfounded. It would be more if we were asking the worker permittee sort of stuff, what happened, and then they're lying to us about that sort of thing. And we have taken action against worker permittees for that sort of action, but we take, complaints come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they are founded and sometimes they are not.
So sorry, Amanda Metzler, one more follow-up, Kelly. So if a complaint comes in and it becomes unfounded, let's say for diversion that has documentation all the way through for the original complaint for it, would that licensee where that was against have to file a complaint to OLCC on that worker for that to be able to happen? Because right now the workers can go around and make all these false complaints and there's no repercussions for them, and that creates a lot of drama at any business for it. And so there isn't any kind of administrative action through OLCC. If they make a false complaint through BOLI or something like that, there's a a way to go through it and you still have to fight it off. But I'm just really looking for a way to workers to be held more accountable for the damage that they're doing at businesses, or their ability for the ability of the damage that they can do.
The only thing I would say,
Go ahead,
Amanda, the only thing I would say to that, Rich Evans, for the record, is that they have to make a material statement or false statement to the commission. And so if they did it to Boley or somebody else, I don't think that would apply. We have looked at false reporting on the worker permit side. But frankly, a lot of the complaints are not that serious or unfounded. I haven't seen a rash of what you're saying. Maybe you know of a case that I'm not aware of, but we are looking at, in the totality of everything we're doing, in that how much responsibility should a permittee have for bad conduct compared to what a licensee had. But I have reviewed a couple cases where the licensee has made, or the permittee has made, some false statements. And I think we've charged those, but there's several of them. If they say, oh, this was done and it didn't happen, we haven't actively went after every and each one of those reports.
Rich, just one more follow-up. For someone that would say, I was forced to cut weed and divert it by the owner of the business, that would be something more serious that could be addressed by the OLCC.
If they reported it to us.
Yes.
Yes, if they reported it to us in a false statement, it depends on the circumstances. I don't know if this is a case you're talking about. I haven't heard of it, if it is. But it depends on the statement, if it's a material statement. We frankly, internally, have been really reviewing all false statements because we've had some false statement cases in the past, not just on this, but on other ones where there's kind of a fudging or a little bit of a conversation, and then we've had a history, maybe not a history, but wanting to charge those with false statements, and we're really reviewing each and every false statement to make sure that they are material to the case and that we are, it is the right thing to do. Not just, I was a trooper for 30 years and everybody told me they weren't speeding the speed they were. It's a common reaction for folks when they're caught on something to maybe not give the full truth at the very beginning. So we're very careful about that now, and we're trying to make sure that we're applying that when it's appropriate. So I would have to review each and every case on that, Amanda, if that one is a case that's true. I don't know if that is something that has happened, but I'd have to review the totality of the package.
And does it matter if it wasn't settled, it was found to not be a violation for it, but it was multiple.
So even if it was not found a violation, we would still have to prove the intentionality of the lie to us. The unfounding part probably is irrelevant to the case of whether the material lie, if it was a lie, that would help obviously, but that's not the burden of proof to prove that.
Thank you very much for the clarification.
Will, you're up next.
Thank you. Will Rasmussen, just a couple of follow-up points. In that industry memo we sent, we suggest 90 days. That I realize that might be aspirational. Really what I think is important is that the agency have some defined set of days or months to issue those so that we're not stuck back where we are right now of trying to piece together what happened 2 years ago. Now that we're getting to the penalty section, a couple of thoughts and things that hopefully you'll digest as you can wade into the industry memo. Right now, the violations seem kind of scattershot, if you will, how they're classified. It's like something that seems kind of serious to me is down in like type 3, and some stuff that I'm like, that to me could absolutely happen from happenstance and incidents is a type 1 or a type 2. In one of those exhibits we attached, we start off by suggesting a description of what types of violations should fall into each category. So for example, category 1, we follow the legislature's language, which is category 1 violations or violations that pose a significant risk to public health or safety. If something doesn't pose a significant risk to public health or safety, it probably shouldn't be a type 1. Then type 2, we say just poses a risk to public health and safety. Type 3 is potentially poses a risk. And then the type 4 or 5 or more things about it, violations inconsistently with orderly regulation and violations that create a climate conducive of abuse or stuff like that, just kind of control type issues. I think if this committee could agree on a framework of, what type of culpability warrants a type 1 versus a 2 or a 3, we could actually turn this table into something that's, helpful and kind of reflects culpable behavior. And I tend to think that the, type 3, 4, and 5 on this, if you're eating, for example, 5 type 6s, and let's just say you have a consistent misentry in metric or something, or you're misweighing something and you do it 20 times. I really don't think that those lower violations should roll up to revoke. I think it'd be more appropriate to increase the fines or something like that, rather than pulling somebody's license, even if they have a number of the smaller ones. Fine them a bunch, but a death sentence is pretty harsh for some of those small ones. And one last point, sorry for monologuing for a second. I'm so glad to hear the agency is going to look back through this kind of this big backlog of stuff. I've got some cases from a couple of years ago, and I know other people on this call do too. And, Rich and Gary and whoever's wading through that, I hope you will look at those from that same metric of, did this behavior really pose a serious public health risk? My pet peeve case is one where a bud tender was just holding some product at a point of sale, and it's maybe $40 or $20 worth of product, and somebody then stole it and ran out the door. There's just not much somebody can do about that. And I'd say, to me, the public health and safety of that, particularly 2 years down the road when the licensee has documented a compliance plan that they've rolled out across all their stores, it's not really getting anybody anything, neither the agency nor the industry anything, by trying to fight about that. Thanks.
Jesse and then Amy.
Can I chime in?
Amy, if you go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm not sure, like everyone else, how to chime in. I think like every lawyer on here has had a very old case come through, and other than agreeing with all of their frustration, I mean, from my perspective, absolutely certain threshold for a case to not be considered a cancellation is once we cross the good cause timeline threshold. So, I mean, we know that at the 2-year mark, the agency considers that to be a kind of trigger for considering good cause if there's not a trigger sooner than that. So when I start to have cases where the conduct that would result in a cancellation is from 2018, I feel that it becomes like it doesn't make any sense, because my client could apply for another license and be considered within the good cause timeline that we have a lot of precedent for. So, I mean, I hope that as we're looking at these, that, for 2 reasons: 1, the good cause finding, and 2, that if the agency has let an licensee continue to operate for 2 years, then is it really a public threat? And so I find there to be this like incongruence between saying this conduct was so bad we have to take the license, but we've let them operate for 2 years, sometimes even until those violations are issued. So, I mean, I'd like the agency to consider, really putting a hard deadline on when a violation is so old that, I mean, in addition to the other things everyone's talked about, being able to prove the conduct, being able to find evidence, the fact that maybe client has taken on investors or they've begun to operate different facilities. I think, to me, that 2 years must and should be a firm cutoff. So I just wanted to add that in there. I find it to be challenging. And I guess the other thing I would encourage, and I don't think it needs to be codified in the rule, but I think it's something to think about is, I've done dependency work for a long time, and when we work with DHS, we often change the language in the charging instrument. And in those cases, we change it oftentimes because parents don't find things palatable, or you can just get them to a place where they can admit the conduct. But I think in this instance, the language that you admit to can impact that good cause finding. So I would urge that we have more conversations, especially when we're dealing with the case presenters, about how the conduct is framed. And for example, when licensee did not misenter something into metric, or you have a licensee who lives far away and diversion happened through an employee, that we have a lot of flexibility in what that charging language looks like, especially on these old violations. Thanks, Amy Margolis.
Amy, Jesse, and then I see Aaron purchase his hand up.
So sorry, I'm trying to remember all of the different things. Okay, so first thing, we are at a time where nationalization is on the horizon. People are expanding in other states. And oftentimes you have to apply and report your violations if you are a current license holder in Oregon, if you're applying for a license in other states. And so I don't know if it's possible, but I would really strongly argue for calling like everything below a Cat 3 a citation or something else that doesn't have to be reported to other states for small technical errors, things that don't actually put the public health and safety at risk, and or something else. So like get all these things that aren't actually threats to public health and safety do not go on people's like records, so to speak, or are not things that have to be reported if they're applying for licenses in other states. I think that's really, really important. I think it could be easily done. And again, I think everything below a Cat 3, but at least a Cat 4 or 5 should fall into that category, and everything within the VOC program I think already does, but would really be beneficial. I'm curious, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to double check. There's the issue of like multiple licensees in the reporting of a felony or arrest, and I just and I'm not very familiar with this part of the law, so if I'm incorrect, I apologize. And again, this is Jesse from Orca. But if there's like 4 license holders and one of them gets convicted, and doesn't follow these things, if the other folks don't know about it, I would hope that it wouldn't apply to the license, but to the licensee specifically, that it would they might not be able to be licensed, they might have to be kicked off, but the other licensees who did nothing wrong were not caught up in the bad behavior of somebody that might be outside of their ability to know. Somebody could go to Vegas for a weekend and end up with a felony charge and not say anything to anybody, or their other business partners, or just might be living in a completely different state and not super connected to the business at all. And so just something that I think, don't punish people who haven't done anything wrong. And so with the licensee convicted of a felony, I just hope that's to the applicant, the individual applicant versus the license in general. And then going back to the previous rule, I wasn't quite ready to move on, and sorry for keep doing this, but under C, we have the language of that is, it's on page 24. I'm trying to find the number here. I think it's 4, capital C. Self-reporting of a violation by a licensee or applicant. This mitigating circumstances do not apply where licensee has a pre-existing duty to report to the commission. And I know I've heard from people like, oh, well, this can't be a way out of a violation if you self-report. But I think mitigation is not complete, removal of the violation. You can still suffer penalties. It's just, you're not going to suffer the most severe circumstances and things like that. And honestly, I really feel like that's counterproductive, is that where license has a pre-existing duty to report to the commission. I think that if someone, sees a violation, are required by law to do it, and they do it, like I think that's still evidence that they're trying to be good, compliant with the law, and not something that should just be ignored and not credited. I think that it creates, you know, and I've heard this from people where they self-report and they're like, well, that's what you're supposed to do, so you don't get any credit for that. And like, how do I prove that I'm the type of person who's trying to do the right thing if everything I'm doing, you know, in response to a potential violation is not accounted for? And so I just do think that that one on page 24 is really problematic, and I would strongly suggest, you know, not having that, you know, having self-reporting always be the thing that someone should do, and not just out of threat of, well, it didn't get worse for you, so therefore. And you know, that's just my personal feelings. And so for right now, those are two big points I wanted to make.
Thanks. Next up is Erin, and then Amanda.
Erin Purchase for the record. I had a couple things I wanted to contribute. I really like the idea of putting the minor violations as citations, and definitely not revoking. It's intimidating as a licensee because we rely on our employees to run our business, especially in rural parts of Oregon. It's very hard to get experienced managers, and these laws are very complex. So most managers have a hard time reading the law. They're not attorneys, and it gets intimidating. And then the next thing I have been wanting to suggest, I should kind of write an email, but I believe it was in Washington, they created positions within the Cannabis Control Commission for compliance officers, where they work with the licensees to help them understand compliance, but they don't issue citations. So they work for the state. They're here for the licensees, for people to call and ask questions, and, you know, just be a reference for the licensee, for the managers, the employees. So that way they have somebody to reach out to and they don't feel intimidated, because an inspector can come and just write a fine that shuts your whole facility and your whole license and your whole business down. And so it's scary. And if we could create a bridge between the licensee and the regulatory body so that there's trust and there's no fear, I think that we would see more compliance. And also if licensees were visited more and there was more communication between them and the regulatory body, I believe that we would see higher rates of compliance, because right now some licensees have never even seen their inspectors and they don't really feel like there's any oversight. So when you guys come in and start issuing violations for 2 years back, it's just like really stressful as a business owner. And I feel like we could probably do better to create a system that will work better in the future. And that was all I had to contribute.
Amanda Metzler for the record. I just wanted to ask some clarification from Kelly and Rich on the arrest. So it makes sense to have to report to the commission, obviously, if convicted. I just was wondering the rationale if someone gets arrested, the need for the reporting to the OLCC until it's worked its way through the court system. We have some things happening in Southern Oregon where there's some arrests happening that are obviously going to get fixed when it goes to trial or other data is coming out. So Rich, I was just wondering if maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, one of the main concerns is we've been notified when somebody notifies us of arrest. Some of those have been diversion of marijuana from their licensed premises to other states. If they notify us, we can look to see if it's pertinent to the business or not. And we have had several, especially early on, where they're arrested in like Nebraska with basically the contents of their licensed premises as they were going across the United States. And obviously that's a public safety issue for us for what's on the back. So notification in and of itself, we will look at the crime and the violation to see if it is pertinent to the business or not. And that's why we still have that response or that statute out there, Amanda. It's more of, we want to make sure that it isn't diversion or inversion or some of the issues that are obviously the big public safety. If it's not related, say it's a alcohol Dewey in Nevada, then obviously we're not gonna move on that right away. but that's why, because we have had those. And the urgency of that is we got to pull the cameras, we got to do the quick investigation, and we have had multiple examples of that one right there, and that's the one that we're the most concerned with.
Rich, just another clarification, Amanda, for the record. For people who have been illegally growing marijuana in the past and have been arrested for that and are pending trial, but now are on the recreational side doing it legally, what does that look like for you if they notify you of a previous arrest that was for 2 years ago that is finally getting moving forward in the court system?
Well, they should have notified us for the arrest, and Kelly can correct me if I'm wrong in the previous time. But
they weren't OLCC worker permit holders then, so it wouldn't have.
If they should have disclosed that in their application, I believe.
Okay, okay. I'll follow up with you later offline.
Yeah, follow up with me, Amanda, with an email.
Any other questions about the penalties that we've proposed, or anything in the penalty rule or exhibit? Jesse. So you had your hand raised, Jesse. If you're talking, you're muted.
There we go. Sorry, Jesse Bonacue, Orca. The 8590 H under non-compliance with testing requirements. I feel like that seems very broad and not specific. I understand where there is a clear threat to public health and safety, but I also think that that's something like, but it also seems so broad. I don't know what that is. That everything with testing, or is it like, if I don't know. I just feel that one, feel like some slim qualifying information such as intentional, knowing, or something else that just means like you should have had to have known that this was bad, like but some sort of legalese that would limit that a little bit beyond just non-compliance with thing, I think is appropriate. And that was just the only other thing I was going to say. So thank you, Jesse from Orca.
Thanks, Jesse. Will, and then Scott.
I think the meat and potatoes of what this rec can achieve is talking about this table and these penalties and how to try to group things. So I hope folks put in some bandwidth and time and energy on that. One of the things we flagged in our industry memo is that a number of violations don't currently appear to have any classification, at least in the rules. And as kind of and I see that OLCC caught a bunch of those in their proposed rules, but we'd really like if every violation could correlate to a specific classification of whatever it is.
For the record, Rich Evans, Will, I'm going through every rule and listing out every violation and tracking whether it's unclassified, not where they all land. And then we're going to have a discussion about where those should be and whether or not we do it by rule or internally notifying everybody that this rule is going to be treated as a class 3 or a class 4. We'll have something there. I don't like to go back to rule every time, but I'm definitely painstakingly going line by line. Even though we haven't charged some of those violations, they're still in rule and unclassified, and I think it's important that we know where those penalties are, where we're going to align those in the future so that everybody knows. So that process is in, that work that you're asking for is in process.
Thank you. We took a crack at it, so feel free to look over our shoulder on our homework too if it saves any hours on your end.
Okay.
Thanks.
No, thank you.
I'm looking at the Schedule 1 penalties, and I'm looking at 475B 265 sub 6. Retailer failed to pay taxes or file a return as required. There are other. We would be also concerned that if a business had not filed their property taxes, or I think the state would probably have a concern, and the employees might have a concern if they'd failed to pay properly withhold payroll taxes, FICA, those sorts of taxes as well. So if somebody's is in arrears and they're not paying, and they haven't contacted DOR or the county assessor on their property taxes, we would like that to be included in that penalty phase. So if it's any tax that the person's not at least attempting to make good on, that ought to be a class 1.
Scott, this is Kelly with OLCC. Our statutory authority really only addresses the marijuana retail tax. So that may be a little outside of what OLCC would take action against. That being said, Department of Revenue does routinely notify, they have a sort of a procedure in place where they can ask us to suspend a license indefinitely for non-compliance with other tax programs, which we do. So that is an avenue. But I think historically what OLCC has been focused on, what's in our statutory mandate, is the non-compliance with the marijuana retail tax.
And if they're not forking over the property taxes, do the assessors contact you, or?
This is Kelly with OLCC. I am not aware of that. I don't know. I am not sure about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That might be some further conversation.
Yeah, separate conversation. And before I jump to Will, it was actually in response to oh, I had already forgotten it. Never mind. It'll come to me. There was something that you said that I wanted to address, but it's not important. So go ahead.
I haven't seen OLCC pull licenses for not paying taxes, but I had a super brief conversation with some industry folks kind of on this question recently, and nobody freaked out anyway on that small subset if licenses were to be pulled for not paying serious back taxes, as long as the licensee is, told you're owed money. It's really, not fair to have, all the responsible industry members pay their taxes and have somebody not. Which leads me back to kind of a question for the agency. I would guess or suspect that the agency has pulled some data, or at least has some data on its fingertips on what violations have been charged over the last couple of years, i.e., and it's something I used to do periodically, is do a records request and try to put it together on my end. But does the agency have any data that it could share on what kind of violations it's seeing a lot of, or what type of violations are getting charged a lot of? Because we put together that table where we try to catch every single violation that's in black and white law, and I know a number of those don't really get charged with frequency. I'm really curious what does get charged with frequency. That might help us as we try to classify these things appropriately.
This is Kelly with OLCC. We are working on updating our internal tracking, but in our department, what we're tracking is sort of the case moving through the process and hitting those deadlines when notices are issued. It's not so much about the subject matter. There is more tracking on the compliance side about sort of what they're investigating, but sort of what the violations that get investigated aren't always the violations that get charged. So it would be, and that's something that I'd like to get to, where we have better data about the types of violations that we're charging. But at this point in time, it would be also a manual process on our end to figure that out. I mean, we sort of have general anecdotal knowledge that I see a lot of camera violations come across my desk, and then some sort of in like a lot of CTS tracking. And in previous presentations from a couple years ago, I had some of my staff sort of tell me anecdotally what common violations, and we reported that out. But it's something that I think would be beneficial for all of us to know. So it would take us a little bit of time to sort of pull that together, but it's something that would be beneficial to us as well. So I'm going to put it on my list for that proverbial rainy day.
I'm not planning on. I'm not yet anyway. Nobody's asked me to. Planning on sending you a records request for like all charge docs for the last 2 years or something. But if you had them anywhere and sent them over, I'd gladly have one of our paralegals or something go through and just suck out all of the data on which rule numbers are charged, if helpful.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, we do it's pretty easy for us to send out the charge because we have them stored in one place, but we do have to go through the redaction process because, you know, certificate of service contains processors and wholesaler producer licenses, addresses, but it's not an we've gotten that request before. It's not an impossible task, but I do appreciate the offer. Maybe we can connect later about sort of how to achieve that. Well, any other thoughts on the penalty rules? I see Jesse's, hang on, Jesse, I see your microphone on. I think Amanda's probably going to say this at the end, but if you have other thoughts after this wrap and you want to send them to us in writing, you absolutely can do that. So did you have another comment, Jesse?
I guess I was just trying to go through this and thinking about it, but I mean, I agree with everything that Will said. And I was going to also say, like, I guarantee you that there's, you know, a lot of free labor that could be had from interns and such that to help do that process. And so, yeah, because I do think it would be really important. I think we are in a place where we want to be helpful, but sometimes it's a little bit hard because we're somewhat in the dark sometimes on some of these things. And what you guys are seeing versus what we're hearing. And so seeing some hard numbers and data would be really helpful to the process. And that is that's the long and short of it at the moment.
Okay, thanks. In the interest of time and hearing nothing else, I'm going to kick it over to Amanda to talk about 3 other rules that are unrelated to violation reclassification that we wanted your feedback on, and then we'll move into the fiscal impact portion of the meeting.
Thanks, Kelly. So just so everybody knows, these rules were added just because they were missed in the 2 previous racks that we had. So we're starting on page 28, and it's 845-025-7520. The change in this rule is moving the time when you tag the mature or tag the immature plants from 24 inches to 36 inches. We wanted to make this change so it falls in line more with the new transfer privileges so that we're in Senate Bill 408. The next rule, and it's the same change, so I'll do them both at once, is 845-025-7570. And this change also changes the 24 inches to the 36 inches for tagging immature plants. Okay, and I see Amanda has a question or comment.
Amanda Metzler for the record. Thank you, OLCC, for changing the height of that for the transfer. The other thing I wanted to ask is in that the harvest, if we're looking at 7570 number 4, a cultivation batch can have no more than 100 immature marijuana plants. I would ask the OLCC to lift that number. Right now, since we are kind of moving away from the individual plant tags, the mother plant where those specific clones come from is pretty irrelevant. And I'll have like 100 plants a whole bunch of times through the system of the same strain, and it makes it very unorganized for it with us. So if there isn't any reason for it to be 100, I would really like to see that lifted. You guys lifted that at harvest. You used to only be able to harvest 100 plants at a time, and now you can harvest your whole strain at one time. So I think it might just be a metric change, but I would really ask if we could have them larger than 100.
Okay, I have a note of that. Marianne? Marianne, we're not able to hear you. No, I can't. Your microphone's showing green, but I'm not hearing any sound. If you want to, you can share your comments. You can share them in the chat if it's short and I could read it, or you can send an email to olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov, and we can take your comments that way as well.
Or I suspect there's a dial-in function if you want to call in a minute. Although actually maybe there's not for the leaders.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. full of technical issues today. Any other comments on changing the plant height for immature tagging? Okay, I'm not seeing, oh, Annie.
Is there going to be, oh, Annie Rothrock, Wild, is there going to be further discussion on being able to reduce the number of tags used for batches and harvests and plants? I mean, is going to be something brought up? And is that something we could bring up now because these rules are open, or will that be down the line?
It's going to be down the line, but it definitely is in the works.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation, Amy. It's just a separate conversation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so Marianne had something about number 3 on segregating cultivation batches. It seems to say that every batch must be segregated. So, okay, so I'll have to make a note of that, and maybe we can make the language a little bit more clear either way on that one. Will?
I'm not sure what part of this rulemaking it fits into, but this is probably the best spot. And Jesse brought this up earlier. But there really should be a way in, I know there've been really high level conversations at OLCC to clear these old violations, or at least to drop suspensions to pay a fine. This comes up in the context of trying to keep Oregon a hub for cannabis businesses when the state boundaries come down, when federal delegalization comes along. Our folks are running into all sorts of anti-competitive headaches. I see it largely in California. I'm sure it happens in other states where you have a competitive licensing regime and 50 people come in to apply for 10 applications. And folks have to disclose some suspension they took where they could have paid a $3,000 or $5,000 fine back in 2017. They've clearly cleaned up their whatever that compliance issue was. It's something that might not have even been charged. OLCC might not have prioritized it as an actual charged thing, following like verification of compliance and following this rulemaking. So at a minimum, I think, as part of this, we could say, if you took a suspension a couple of years ago and you want to pay a fine too, we'll reclassify that to a fine, or have some other simple process for folks to clear old violations so it's not handicapping our businesses, Oregon's businesses in other states.
Okay, thanks, Will.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This is Rich Evans for the record. Will, how in California are they required to report every violation, or how would us dropping it off a record would fix that?
Yeah, very good question. It's in California, it's very city and local jurisdiction specific. I've seen some that only require you to report suspensions, so that if OLCC said, if you've served a suspension before and want to pay us that fee in lieu on top of that, we'll change our records to show that you took the suspension route took the fine route instead of the suspension route. And then in those jurisdictions, you don't have to report it at all. In other jurisdictions, yeah, it's every violation. So it would have to be some process to clear that violation. And maybe it's they, document a compliance fix plus 2 years of clean operations or something like that. To say that, all right, now we're treating that thing that was a violation as a, fill in the blank, a warning, documented, corrected, enforcement action, any classification different than violation.
All right, thanks, Will.
Okay, so any other comments about the plant height for immature plants being tagged at 36 inches? Okay. Okay, Mike, sounded like you came off mute for a second. I'm not sure if you had anything to say.
I did. Just a quick one. Thank you on that. It makes a big difference specifically for our farm and our workflow. And I'll just take the opportunity, because I'm running a little low on time, to just a big thanks to all of you at the agency. I know this has been a heavy lift, and a lot of thought and time and effort have gone into it. And despite our nitpicking on some significant issues that we still want improvement on, at least from standpoint of my members and most of the people I've spoken to in the industry, we're really happy with this process and appreciate the volumes of work you guys have done. So big thanks.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Okay, so not seeing any additional comments. The last rule is 845-025-7580. This is currently a temporary rule and allows you to do basically batches of wet weight rather than doing the weight of each plant. This is a rule that you guys, the industry wanted. We put it in a temp rule. We have to discuss it or have it in language in a rules advisory committee to make it permanent. So we're adding it here to make it permanent. Comments? I see Amanda has her hand raised.
Amanda Metzler, for the record, I want to thank OLCC for this change. It has cut our labor down by over 50%, and being able to harvest without individual plant tags and doing the median weight. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad we could do something helpful. Jesse, I see your hand raised, and then Peter.
Just on the record, I agree with Amanda, and thank you for this. And just so you don't feel too beat up, there is a lot of progress in these rules in general. And, you know, you guys have, I think, changed, where we feel like the tone has changed with your relationship with the industry and working to create a reasonable, rational regulatory system. Obviously, there's still work to be done, but it would be hard to say that there isn't obvious progress in these rules. So also just in general, we acknowledge that and thank the OLCC's work for helping to make this a more viable industry.
Great, thanks. And Cedar, you had a comment?
Yeah, we are also very, very appreciative of the simplification for weighing plants during harvest. Harvest is just insanely complex because of the requirements to repeatedly weigh, you know, all these different portions of the plants, including the waste material. So every simplification there is extremely helpful for us. You know, harvest, we get slammed, outdoor farms get slammed with weather, with labor shortages. It's always a completely overwhelming process to try to get the entire crop in. So everything we can do to speed that up really helps out the entire market. And also, just to add on that, we're very supportive of the change to the 36-inch plant height for tagging. Also, I support Amanda's comments about expanding the batch sizing. All of these things would really help out our farmers. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you for the comments. Amanda.
Amanda Metzler, for the record, and maybe next time we couldn't have rulemaking in October. Maybe we could push it to when harvest was over, maybe into November, just for next time.
Well, we're in luck. Next year it's only a February session, so we won't be doing rules so late in the year. Okay. All right. Okay, so seeing no more comments, we're going to go ahead and just, I'm going to read the fiscal impacts statement for a second. So everybody received the fiscal impact statement and also the public health and safety questionnaire for our public health and safety partners. To be able to turn in feedback on that, we ask that you email it to olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov. And so with that, I think we have the meeting wrapped up. So we just wanted to thank you all for your time and your contribution to the meeting today. And then also let you know that on our website, which is under the tab Public Hearings, is where you'll be able to be informed of our upcoming public hearing, which will be on all of the rules that we've discussed over the past couple of months. So those will be, we have different racks for each rule set. All of those will be in one rule package, and that'll all go to the public hearing, I believe, at the beginning of December. So thank you all for your time this morning. Have a nice day.
Thank you.